Hey there, fellow XLs, and welcome back to another video. Today I'm sort of gonna be going over the new Torchlight League start, because there is a new season coming out in, well, tomorrow actually. And I sort of just wanted to do an overview of the season as well as talk a little bit about what I find interesting, especially a few of the changes, in particular the passive trees, which I find very, very intriguing. So we're gonna sort of go over a lot of that towards the end of the video. And yeah, without further ado, let's hop into it. So first thing about the season is the season mechanic actually looks pretty damned cool. The season mechanic is sort of going to be like these heist things, and there's going to be sort of lockers that spawn inside your map, and they're going to have a bunch of enemies that spawn around them, and the enemies are sort of going to run away, and then you have to kill them. You'll get these tower coins, which are sort of the league specific currency for further down the line. And as you can see, league mechanic is very static. So what this makes me think is that you will be very much incentivized to play a build that maybe has better AoE and better coverage, and not necessarily the fastest build in the world, because the league mechanic does require you to stand still for a decent amount of time, and you're going to be doing this every single map. So that is one very interesting thing. So here you can see them highlighting sort of the tower coins right here. And basically, the way that I understand it, the tower coins are sort of the way that you get your meta progression for the league mechanic. And yeah, overall, league mechanic looks very fun. It's first in-game map mechanic in like a few seasons, so I'm actually very excited for this one, because I'm sort of a little bit sick of running canvas, because I've been running canvas for like the last last 2 seasons or so. So it will be pretty nice to be able to step out of the canvas. So this is I believe the league specific side area that you could go into as well. This is mostly just, again, this is like an enhanced version of the league mechanic that you can step into. I believe you pay like tower coins for this one as well. Very, very, very nice. And has like a big loot pop at the end, which, I mean, who doesn't like that? But overall, the league mechanic looks very cool. Now, the most interesting thing, and the part that I was waiting to get into, and this is probably the part that I'm going to focus on most with this league mechanic, is actually the gambling system. So if you guys are familiar with Path of Exile, we sort of have like div card gambling with the Hoarder Crafting Bench and Life Force. The gambling system in this game is actually pretty cool. They're introducing it this league, and the reason that I like this is because it adds a new way for items to cycle in and out of the economy, which I think is really important. And in the past, if you were to corrupt an item, let's say, what would often happen is that you'd be left with an item that's kind of useless, and it would just sit in your stash and you couldn't really do anything with it. But over here, they actually hover over it. You can actually see there's an option that lets you actually re-roll over corrosion affixes, or corrosion base affixes in this case, which I think is super, super cool, because it lets you sort of maybe give whatever that item is that you corroded an actual use. And then here you can see they have div card gambling, which can double or delete your cards. Very familiar to me as part of Excel player. Undetermined fates, I'm not too sure about this one. This is probably the one that I'm the most apprehensive of, just because there's no point at which undetermined fates, at least to my knowledge, are account bound until you apply them to your character. So the reason this scares me a little bit is because for a lot of us, like the higher end of undetermined fates are sort of like too expensive to use. And so like we usually just look into the lower tier of undetermined fates, which would either be like one minor or one medium, instead of going for the super high rolled ones. And so the only reason this scares me is because it might make those fates a little bit too expensive for us to get. Alternatively, this could just make the higher end a little bit cheaper as well. But I don't see a world where the lower end wouldn't get more expensive because of the new system, unless the currency to gamble these is very, very expensive. So not entirely sure. Will remain to see. This is probably the only one that I'm like majorly apprehensive about, just because of those reasons. I feel like maybe there is a world where the lower end of undetermined fates might become a little bit inaccessible, but otherwise, very, very cool system. Again, gambling's kind of fun, especially when it's in a video game and it's with digital currency that you don't care about. So pretty cool. and pretty exciting. And honestly, a good way to send your league off, I guess. You could sell everything and then buy an Undetermined Faith and just send all your currency. This is the one that I actually find kind of interesting. This lets you re-roll the corrosion base affixes on your item. Pretty cool, especially if you're fishing for something. I know I've had certain builds where I wanted to fish for something, which is pretty nice for. And this also, in theory, makes amulet corrosions a little bit better because maybe you can try to fish for something like +1 additional curse on your amulet corrosion. I don't know. Reroll base affixes, again, this thing, the only thing I'm worried about here is the same thing that I'm worried about with Undetermined Fates. However, here it's not as bad, I think, because generally across the board, at least from the way that it's displayed, even when it loses the base affix, it still seems to be a priceless item because it still has like that white border. So I do think, like, even if as long as it still remains priceless, that's like pretty nice, as well as considering the fact that I just feel like there's a much larger amount of priceless items on the market than there are Undetermined Fates. So I don't know. I think this will probably be fine, but we'll see. And so here is the league mechanic power specific, like sort of like the league mechanic specific power scaling. So the way that I understand it is there are a bunch of these sort of sequence tokens, and every time you pick I'm actually gonna have to rewind here a little bit so that we can sort of fish for exactly when he goes over this. um I don't know if the first one. Yeah. So here, when you're sequencing, basically you have a bunch of these tokens, and then you can pick one token, and then it will give you a new selection of tokens that you can put into another slot, and you kind of can just continue to go through. Now, as far as I understand, the order of your sequence doesn't actually matter, just the colors do. And basically, whatever you get out of this, like whatever league mechanic specific power up you get out of this, depends entirely on whatever sequence you put together. And from my knowledge, your selection of sequences is random, but at least you get to choose. So to my understanding, I think it's going to be a little bit rough. I did some math, and it seems pretty hard to get the exact sequence that you want. Like, I feel like you'll be R&Ding for a long time if you want like one specific sequence. But what it does also look like is that you can replace your sequence, which is very, very nice, because that means obviously, like, you know, you can sort of craft your weapon and then go back and then sequence it later on. Although what I suspect will be more likely the case, or like the better thing to do, would be to sequence initially, and then if you land something that is good for someone else, maybe you sell that instead of trying to re-roll over it. I think that would be like a good way of saving currency. But whether that ends up being good or not, we'll see. However, I do want you to pay attention to how strong these sequences are. These sequences are ridiculously strong. Like, these sequences are insane. So here, like right here, look at this. So has 100 points of fixed order, is nuts for any order build. This is massive amounts of damage. Then you have another advanced sequence here. Spirit Magus skills can be equipped to active skill slots. 25% Origin of Spirit Magus effect for every aura that affects you. 25% aura effect for every Origin of Spirit Magus that affects you. This is also insane. This is absolutely mental. This one is basically like a mini Eternity. This one is basically like that body armor, like the instacking body armor, which is also insane. This is like the amulet, the Phantom Amulet for every 15% life sealed when at full mana, gain +1 main skill level. Like, these are absolutely nuts. These are very, very, very good. Um, these are very, very good. Like, here, you even have Surging Inspiration. -1 max spell burst, 50% chance to immediately get 1 stack of spell burst charge when using a skill. Now, to my knowledge, this is now gated behind an internal cooldown. I believe it's 0.03, so you are capped on how many you can get. But that's still, this is still insane, right? So pretty damn cracked, right? Like, these sequences are really insane. So I'm hoping that at least early game they'll be decently accessible, and we'll get a good amount of player power out of those. Moving on, this is the new Rosa. She is a mana stacker. Now, I know usually I like talking a little bit about the new Ascendancy. However, I don't find her particularly interesting, so I'm not going to talk too much about her. Here, she is a mana stacker. But however, she is gated by needing to self-cast. Self-casting's never really been my thing. However, there are a couple of people. I think Dawn the Crown and Mia or I think Don the Crown specifically was looking very heavily into her, so I would recommend checking him out on YouTube. He should have a more in-depth video on the new Thea, or the new Rosa, sorry. Keep calling her the new Thea. She looks a lot like Thea. But the new Rosa, if you're interested in that kind of thing, so I would definitely pop over there. But for me personally, I don't find her I don't particularly resonate with her too much. Now, the other thing that they're doing is they're sort of replacing all the imbue skills with these new focus skills, which build up focus. And once they reach a certain amount of focus, they automatically trigger some sort of effect. So, for example, flame focus is like an explosion that will trigger on kill. The ice focus is like this storm that follows you. The thunder focus, I believe you saw earlier, is like this wave that goes out. I believe I don't know if they showed it here, but there's also like a fizz. There's also a phase focus that kind of like explodes in front of you, like a big ground slam almost. So the focus skills do seem pretty cool. I am interested to see what happens with them. The numbers actually look pretty good. Like their flat damage numbers are actually pretty damn good. So I'm excited to see if anyone makes any like cool or strong builds with them. I might be inclined to do one myself with Fizz and Fire, because I think having like the explode would be pretty damn strong. But yeah. Moving on, there's some new uniques. Now, Edict of Trinity, I think, is a very nice early game body armor. I actually don't know if this is particularly good end game, but we'll see. But I do find this kind of intriguing. It's basically got you deal it takes your elements, as long as you have like a well balanced elemental build, like let's say you're 33 33 33% split, it'll select at random between those elements and give one element the on make, or it'll choose one element and you will only deal damage of that elemental type for that one hit, and it'll deal times 6 elemental damage. I believe this is a corroded affix because it's got the red dot, but I'm also a little bit confused because it says it's not corroded and it's priceless, which we haven't seen in a while, so I don't know. But it will choose that specific thing and then give it more damage. So I think best case scenario, if you have a perfect 33 33 33 split, you will basically take that particular damage type and you'll go 33.3 times 6, which should give you about 200% damage, aka double damage for that one hit. And in addition, you'll get a decent amount of Elipen. Now, the one caveat to this is that if you do have a worse split, like let's say you have 30 35 35, it'll be more likely to choose the lower damage type, which is a little bit rough because that means, let's say you are 30 35 35, now you're going from double damage down to 180% more damage. So you really want to try and balance those damage types as best you can, because it will then prioritize picking the lower damage type, which is a little bit unfortunate. But yeah, this is a really cool item. I think it makes tri-Ellie builds very interesting. The other one they showed off is Solid River. I think this helmet is quite frankly very insane. This basically doubles your max spell burst stacks, gives you a slight reduction to your spell burst charge speed, but gives you more damage for skills cost by spell burst. I just think this helmet's insane. Like, I don't know what to tell you guys. This helmet looks absolutely mental. They're probably gonna be very expensive, but it just looks like this looks insane to me. And I'm excited to see what people do with this, because there is 100% going to be something or the other that is really broken with this. The third amulet that they showed off was the Immortals Reverie. Now, this one I do find very interesting because, again, I did say that I was intrigued to see what they do with focus. And approximately 953 focus points consumed is about 10 triggers for most of the focus skills. For some of them it's more, but for most of them it's about 10 triggers, or like slightly less, or slightly more, sorry. And overall, I think the hardest part about this amulet is going to be trying to get that transcendence to 100% effect. However, I do think that if you can get this amulet to 100% effect, this shit would be very, very fun. So very intrigued to see if there is a possible like full focus build which just relies on triggering focus skills, because I reckon that would be really, really fun to play. Because it would literally just be an auto bomber anyway. So I do think this would be really, really cool. I'm excited to see what happens. Now, here's the part that I was sort of very intrigued by, is they are reworking the passive trees. So our first tree, we still get 2 major talents, but now instead of picking from 2 trees, we pick 3 trees. We still have to pick 1 sub tree of the main tree, but we get to pick 3. Like, we get to pick a secondary tree, a tertiary tree, and like a 4th tree, and each of these will only have 1 major talent. So our net major talent count is -1. We lose a major talent. However, I was doing some sneaking around and some peeking, and I do think that a lot of these talents are actually really insane. Like, genuinely, some of these talent trees are mental. So let's go over some of them. And I do think, to some extent, like if you were to compare to the old trees, you might be like, I was a mana stacker. I really liked how much mana was an Arcanist, and they took some of that away or whatever. However, I do want to note that you have to remember that we now have 4 trees, so you can actually you very often in the old system, what would happen is you'd have 1 major talent that you really, really want for your build, especially early game before you could get pedigrees or anything. You'd have 1 major talent you really, really want for your build, but the tree absolutely sucks. So now you're forced to waste like 36 points or 32 points on nodes that you don't care about just to get that major talent. And 32 points is a lot. Now that threshold is lowered to 24. So let's say you want to go into a tree just for a major talent, you only need to spend about 24 points. And the truth is, getting 24 decent points in a tree isn't that hard. Getting 32 decent points in a tree is pretty damn hard. But 24, not that bad. So, A, you have an easier time getting good points in your tree, but also B, you also have to remember is pedigrees are no longer now going to be split to distinguish between minor and major, or they're not going to split to distinguish between the tier 1 and tier 2 talents. So pedigrees can get any combination of talents, which is really insane for some scenarios. Like, let's say you wanted I don't know, focus a bunch plus shell pedigree. That wouldn't have been possible earlier, but now it is. So that's a very random example, but there you go. Now, the big part about this, which I want to talk about, is sort of what makes this new system really, really good. And what makes the new system really, really good is the fact that A, you only need 24 points on the tree, and B, you get to actually choose trees you want. So let's say I'm playing an ES build. Traditionally, I wouldn't really be able to go Magister, because after like my first like 16, 20, 24 points, my points were kind of shit. I'd be like, okay, I guess I want some recharge speed, right? And the other problem was, now I'm dedicating 1/3 of my character power to complete just defenses, right? I'm not getting any damage out of it. However, now that portion is a lot smaller, and you still get what you come to the tree for, right? So 2 examples of why I would come to Magister are either Shell for 35% additional max energy shield, or Barrier Radiance for energy shield recharge cannot be interrupted and the 50% energy shield charge speed, because that's pretty damn strong. Especially when you combine it with something like Force Start. And if you have Force Start triggering every 4 seconds, guess what? That's permanent energy shield recharge, right? So how do you the reason this is sort of really strong is because if we actually count up points here, right, you're going to spend 6 points here. You're going to spend another 6 points on either of these. So that's already 12 points. You could even spend it on these, but these aren't the best crit nodes I've seen. But you can spend it on these as well. So that's already 12 points, right? And now you need to spend another 12. But guess what? You already have access to all these 3 branches, right? So if you're an int build, well, guess what? You could already spend 4 points here, and now you're at 16 points, right? Or if you just want more ES and you want to get immediate start upon entering low energy shield, well, guess what? You could spend down here. Or if you're playing a spell burst build, you can just immediately spend over here. And the big thing here is that you can just get a lot of better nodes for your build in a more dense area, which is really, really nice because realistically, by the time you get like 24 nodes, the odds that I'm playing a spell burst int stacking build that also wants like a bunch of this is pretty low considering what the diversity of builds is. And what traditionally that would mean is that outside of the builds that are going spell burst int stacking with focus blessings, the amount of builds that would actually be able to go Magister were very, very small. And what this ends up doing is it really opens up the tree to a lot of other builds just because the amount of points that you have to spend inside the tree are a lot fewer. So you can be a lot more selective with what you want out of the tree. So I do think that this is one of the best changes they've made in terms of just allowing more diversity in terms of what you can play. And Magister is just one of those examples. So I'm very, very excited about it. And it's probably the part that I wanted to talk about the most. Now, to my knowledge, they've also reworked a few uniques. The notable one that I find very interesting is they have reworked Firebirds. I will probably be playing this further down the line. Basically, this is they've made it scale instead of scaling with your max ES, it now scales with your barrier, which means it'll also scale with barrier effect. Keep in mind, barrier is something that scales with your max ES already baseline, and I'm getting some pretty cool ideas with this. So I do think it's going to be very, very strong, and I'm very intrigued. They did do a slight rework of Carino 3, and I know I've played Carino 3 in the past. Personally, based on the rework, I don't think he's too much stronger. He seems like all right now. At least he's less confusing on the bright side without having like two different modes and giving him a million lines of text, which is nice, I suppose. But he doesn't seem too much stronger. So, whether or not he ends up being super good will remain to be seen. As for league mechanics, they are reintroducing the last Sandlord season back in the base game, so that is going to be interesting to see. They also have a few new nodes on the tree. This one particularly seems pretty cool, which is you get 50% less quant, but you can spec any nodes without any prerequisites, so you can just go around grabbing notables on your talent tree, which I don't know how that's gonna pan out. It does seem interesting. I feel like there's gonna be at least one or two really, really strong strats with that. And yeah, so again, Sandlord's kind of going core again. There's gonna be a few compasses for it. Will it be good? Will it be fun? I don't know. I do believe they are keeping belt blending. However, most of the like hero trait blends are gone. So that's a little bit rough. And then they finally finish off with a little bit of the QOL here. They kind of go over a few things. The biggest one here being filter sound effects, and also the fact that filters will now auto update if the person who made the filter updates the filter. So that's pretty cool. Like it'll give you a little option, ask you if you want to update the filter. So very, very awesome. Very excited for this stuff. I do think this is gonna be very, very cool. Um, and yeah, I'm just I don't know how to say it, but I am for the first time in a decent amount of time pretty excited about a Torchlight season. I think the last couple of seasons have burned me out a little bit because it's been sort of getting to me like the major grind of the game, and me being a full-time uni student makes it a little bit difficult for me to actually commit as much time as this game requires. However, this season does look pretty fun, and the fact that it's an in-game league mechanic makes me think that I won't have to go back to Canvas again. So, that does have me a decent bit more excited. Here they do show off some of the temp events, which are pretty cool. A lot of extra pets here. You can see all the pet orbs, so pretty nice there. And you do get, I believe that's a drop pet insignia for a purple pet, so that is also nice. You get to upgrade a purple pet of your choice. A decent amount of tax vouchers in here as well. You can also sneak some peeks at a couple of cosmetics. I believe these are the vouchers for 50% discount on cosmetic packs as well, which is awesome. And again, decent chunk of battle pack spirits there. And I do believe this is, if you are a new player, they basically give you a starter kit which lets you get a free battle pact spirit of your choice, and then a few decent pets that are pretty strong for early game. Like just getting chunky in Surging Gold, I think, is a nice booster to a new player. So I am glad that they're doing this. Is this gonna catch them up to everyone else? No, probably not. But at least it gives them like a nice fighting chance, you know. So pretty nice there. And yeah, overall, very interesting in the season. I believe that is about it. These are just a few of the cosmetics this league. But yeah, anyway, I cannot wait for this Torchlight season. I do find it very interesting. I would love for you guys to stop by stream. I'm gonna go over some more of these passive trees. And anyway, I will catch you guys later. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you on Torchlight League Start. Bye bye.